Somebody sent me a message asking me what I felt about some of the recent news and government intervention in the economy in terms of its impact on real estate and specifically tariffs. Now, the real estate market, the way I read it, isn't likely to be massively impacted by the tariffs. Now, the car market, obviously, with announcements this week on 25% tariffs on foreign-made cars, that's a really big deal. Being a car guy, I know that that is going to cause a considerable increase in car prices and probably an improvement in car prices for the used car market. But tariffs as it relates to real estate, now, it is a lot of American-made stuff. There are likely material increases, but keep in mind, the majority of the home sales in America are resale properties. They're homes that have already been built. Besides potentially affecting people's ability to afford, with tariffs potentially increasing in the short term the cost of things, I don't think it'll have a massive impact on real estate. Now, could it cause some increase in new construction properties as some materials that aren't made in America could go up? Yeah, but I don't think it'll be a humongous change. And ultimately, I think what a lot of people are promoting is that this is going to be a short-term thing because the long-term goal of these tariffs is to bring jobs and economy and manufacturing back to the U.S., as well as some tax relief that's coming. My hope is the income tax relief that's coming will offset any potential increases in cost of goods for tariffs. So real estate probably not hugely impacted by the tariffs. But I do want to talk about something that has been talked about within Florida, possible government intervention that I think could have a massive impact in our real estate market. And I want to talk about what that could do. Governor DeSantis, I don't know, maybe it was a month or two ago, promoted the idea after someone asked him a question about the idea of abolishing property taxes in Florida. Now, what does this look like and how can the state of Florida afford this? Well, we do have a very large surplus in our state, meaning that we're not operating at a deficit and in debt like the federal government is out the wazoo. We have more money than we're spending, and we're creating more money than we're spending. So Governor DeSantis mentioned that he is very anti-property tax. He feels it's a draconian tax, and he supports the idea of it going away. Well, it isn't just something the governor can just pass a bill and make it go away. It requires a constitutional amendment. It were one of the supermajority, I believe is what they call it, which is a 60% vote by the public in the next election for this to happen. Now, certainly there are some municipalities, cities, counties that would be in an uproar about not having the money for property taxes. And how do they accomplish doing that? Well, the likelihood is they would increase the sales tax. They would potentially look at tourism taxes. But the reality is we say, oh, you now own your property, but you really don't. The federal government, or not the federal government, the Florida government still kind of owns your property, because if you own it outright and you've paid off the mortgage and you don't pay your property taxes, the government's taking it from you. So we talk all the time about, I own this property and home ownership. And in Florida, it's not really home ownership because of the way the taxes are written. So, and again, if you envision that, in Florida, we have about half of the population are homeowners or families that are homeowners, kids or 18-year-olds plus households that own their home. It's around half. So if all of those people, who I think the majority of them would probably say, yes, I'd really like to have a cheaper payment. Yes, I'd really like to not pay my property taxes. Then you've got to make up the difference you've got to add on top of that, you need another 10% for it to pass. Now, who would that 10% be? A lot of real estate agents and mortgage people that, believe it or not, there are a lot of them that do not own homes. I think anyone in the real estate, construction, mortgage, title, anyone in those fields would likely support this. And certainly people that own investment real estate in Florida or commercial property in Florida but aren't homeowners would probably also support this. What does it look like? Well, again, a lot of math has to be done and it has to go through different variations. And before it gets put on as an amendment, it's got to go through different processes with House and Senate to kind of come up with something that everyone can sign off on and legitimately pass. I believe, and I have personally spoken to some Florida representatives that would be involved in this process, and my belief is that when it gets to that point, I think it will get to that point where it will be added as a constitutional amendment. I think we'll see some variations of what's out there. Do I think we're going to see an environment in Florida where no one on any property anywhere pays property taxes? No, I don't think that's happening. I think what ends up happening is, there'll be some sort of limit on property value. Okay. So maybe homes below a certain dollar amount or up to a certain dollar amount is exempt. And then, of course, like most taxes, even though I don't agree with it because it obviously impacts me personally, but for a variety of reasons, I just don't agree in principle with the concept of taxing people that do better more. But nonetheless, I think that's what will end up happening. There'll be a price point where everything below that dollar amount will be exempt, and then anything above that dollar amount will be exempt up to that dollar amount, kind of like, how we have a homestead exemption now. And it also could see some modification to where maybe it's only homesteaded properties, maybe it's not investment properties, or maybe investment properties pay some with some relief. Even so, people like me that own a home that may not get all of the relief, but being in the real estate industry and owning investment property where I may not get as much relief, I would massively support this because I know how much of a positive impact it'll have on the real estate market. So let's talk about that for a minute. And this is purely speculative because this isn't out there right now, but someone asked me about tariffs and I decided to talk about this because I think it's a more pressing issue for Florida and an issue that could be much more impactful. So if there is some sort of massive relief of property taxes, whether that's the complete abolishment of them, the abolishment of property taxes maybe only for homestead, or abolishment below certain dollar amounts, or some sort of ceiling, something like that. What does it do for real estate? Well, we know that our real estate market right now has been very stagnant the last several years. Affordability is a major obstacle. And it's a major obstacle because we still have interest rates that, while historically are not that high, they're really high compared to interest rates from a few years ago when people were able to get 3% and 4% interest rates. Those people in those homes don't want to move today because they don't want to, even if they have the ability to move up and buy a more expensive home, they're stuck attached to this 3% interest rate. And they simply say, I don't want to move and pay a 7% interest rate. Okay. Or a 6.5 or whatever. They don't want to make that move. They don't want to double their interest rate for a more expensive home. So they stay put. Or instead of selling their primary home, they turn it into a rental and then go out and buy the more expensive property. Again, not creating inventory, sellable inventory for buyers that are out there wanting to buy homes. The other thing it causes is affordability. We've seen people leave our state because of affordability. Prices, even though they rose dramatically for a period of time, they haven't risen in 3 years. But what has risen? Property taxes and homeowners insurance and flood insurance, massive rising. So you hear most of the complaints from people right now about how insurance is out of control and it's crazy expensive. Well, if property taxes went away for the heavy majority of homeowners in Florida, the property taxes are more expensive than the insurance. If the property taxes went away, you'd have a lot less complaints about the insurance because affordability would be massively improved. We'd open up the market to more buyers. More people would be able to move here and afford moving here. And in the short term, it would massively improve affordability. It would make the people sitting in their homes not wanting to move. It would promote them moving because even at a higher rate, their payment is kind of back lower than where it was when they were paying taxes. It would also cause appreciation. We've gone 3 years now where our average sale price in Tampa Bay is pretty much unmoved. It's hovered between, mid 400s, 450-ish, 470. It's hovered around that for 3 years now. Instantaneously, we would start to see appreciation again. Certainly not to the extent that we maybe saw it during COVID, but we would see some substantial appreciation again. So people that, right now that bought a year or two ago that can't sell because they don't have enough equity, because they can't pay the fees, because they can't pay the taxes. It would start to provide relief for those people and give homeowners equity again and a growth of equity again that they haven't seen for a few years. Now, that wouldn't happen immediately. It would take a little time for appreciation to show up. So instantaneously, affordability would be improved. Over time, affordability, price increases may catch up with decrease in taxes, and the decrease in monthly payment, a higher price, ends up offsetting that. That would happen over time. But instantaneously, you would see a massive movement and improvement in our market, more people having the ability to buy, more homeowners willing to move and take the jump, less complaints about the insurance market needing regulation because everyone feels like they're getting gouged on insurance. So overall, it would be a very positive thing for our real estate market. Now, where it could be a negative thing, this isn't for me to decide, is, what kind of resources cities and counties that depend on property taxes, what kind of resources would be reduced? Would we need a DOGE-like intervention into some of our local politics to relieve some financial restraints or services that need to be cut or services where there's bloat, expenses that need to be renegotiated? And then, of course, likely increase in taxes for other places to gain revenue, like sales tax, like tourism tax, those types of things, and our surplus budget. So I think it's possible. I don't think it'll be just a wipeout of all property taxes. I think there'll be some sort of provisions to still keep some property tax revenue coming in. But even half of the iteration that's being discussed right now would have massive positive improvement for affordability in our real estate market. So if you want to reach out to your senator or congressman and support the idea of abolishing property taxes, probably a good idea. If you're a homeowner, shoot them a message and let them know that you support it. And hopefully we'll get it on as a constitutional amendment coming soon.